last week, our scripture reading from the Revised Common Lectionary that connects us with all those in Christian worship throughout the world that focus upon a given scripture each week. Last week we had Psalm 24, not as widely known, but one that called us, beckoned us to step up to the gates of the city, to declare them to open. For the King of glory is in our midst. This week, we turn back to David's psalm, perhaps the most well-known, Psalm 23. You can probably hear it coming up in the King James English in your mind. So I'm going to invite you to hear these words in the contemporary paraphrase from the Message. God, my shepherd, I don't need a thing. You have bedded me down in lush meadows. You find me quiet pools to drink from. True to your word, you let me catch my breath and send me in the right direction. Even when the way goes through Death Valley, I am not afraid when you walk at my side. Your trusty shepherd's crook makes me feel secure. You serve me a 6-course dinner right in front of my enemies. You revive my drooping head. My cup brims with blessing. Your beauty and love chase after me every day of my life. I'm back home in the house of the Lord for the rest of my days. A great psalm or song of not only praise, but feeling, trusting the richness of our provider. That throughout that path, whatever we come upon, there is one to gently guide, one to bring us to a place of restoration, of rest, even of our food, so necessary, and one that guides us when we may feel that we have come to a dead end, to the end of the path. Or like that famous children's book is titled, Where the Sidewalk Ends. Someone, some spirit will lead us. But this spirit of good works through companions, those who walk the path with us. So today, let us take up again our story, the wonderful Wizard of Oz. Had to check and see who was behind me back there. Well, stories are beloved not only for their entertainment value, but also what we somehow get from the story within, how it encourages us, how it speaks to a generation, and in the case of the Wizard of Oz, to many generations through time. As I mentioned last week, the 1939 movie by MGM Studios, it's estimated has now been seen by 1 billion, with a B, people. That's not counting reading the book through generations. That's just the numbers that have viewed that film. Well, that doesn't just happen to a so-so story. This happens when a story has power because it carries an inner truth. And of course, those of us that cherish the Hebrew and Christian scriptures of our Bible, it's because through the generations, the centuries, even the millennia, people can still understand the truth behind the words, such as the 23rd Psalm, and they find a renewed hope in them. So for a summer series, it was my intent that we look at this beloved story called the first American fairy tale, myth, or legend, The Wizard of Oz. Now, Frank Baum, as I've mentioned earlier, was very interested in the development of the human soul. Why? Not only through his own life experience and his watching the ways of the world from upstate New York where he lived, to moving to South Dakota, the town of Aberdeen, when he saw it growing and he had great hope for its potential, and then eventually making the decision to move to Chicago at the time of the Great World's Fair of 1893. So Frank was a man with an inquisitive mind. And it led him not to create out of himself a story, but by being open and receptive to what is this human being? He said the master had a story to tell, and the master worked through Frank very rapidly. He said the story of the Wizard of Oz just poured out of him. And never again, although he was to write 13 more books, sequels to the Wizard of Oz, none of them came to him quite like that first story that just poured forth, because it had spiritual power and truth behind it. Now, Dorothy Gale is a most interesting character. For those of us that tend to go to the movies and see the latest superhero story in the theaters, how many of them are based upon a young girl? Well, we'll spend tens of millions of dollars making an action story about a superhero, and she's a little girl from Kansas. No, this is quite unique. And as a little girl, she suggests this innocence and wonder and openness of the human soul. That openness or spirit that is within each one of us. I can't help but think of my own mother, who grew up in these here parts of Missouri, down near Springfield. And she had that wonderful quality that many people called naivete. As a matter of fact, sometimes people use that word in a positive way, and other times it's, oh, you're so naive. And there were times when she said her parents said, oh my, where have we gone wrong? Because my mother was so trusting and so open to the world, they were afraid that as she grew older, there would be times she would be hurt because she was not, protected. But it was a wonderful gift, too. Although she was an intelligent and wise woman, and her family name was Wise, even well into her 90s, she would still awake in the morning with her bright, sparkling eyes and say, what will today bring? An openness, an excitement, at an age in life when some struggle to be excited. So that naivete is suggestive of our little character, Dorothy Gale. Now, it was beautifully expressed in the movie itself, and it was not outlined in the book. In Frank Baum's book, it's on page 3 already, when the cyclone comes and takes Dorothy away. But in the movie, which some of you shared here last Wednesday evening with me, in the movie, there's this whole preamble or pre-story. And from that, we get the wonderful Somewhere Over the Rainbow. And that song of longing, where Dorothy realizes, besides the world that she sees in Kansas, a world that's described as very gray and drab, not particularly complimentary to our neighbors to the west, but it was her experience of it. She began to imagine or be open to a higher reality, a place where all things are possible, where things really do come true, as the song says, and troubles, what? Melt like lemon drops. They fade away because what? There is no reality in them. You know, most of our troubles, as we say in our unity teaching, comes from being enmeshed in fear. Thank you. Right to the point. And fear has no reality in it. It only has the power that we give to it. Jesus, speaking of Satan, wasn't quite the wicked witch of the West, but it's about the same thing in Jesus' culture, that Satan was the father of lies. There is no truth in him. It was humanity's fabrication of evil and fear. Now, I'm not saying that that can't be powerful in our world, because we know what human beings can do to one another from a place of fear and hatred. That's the challenge that we still encounter to this very day. But in our story, Dorothy, taken by the cyclone into another reality, and just as an important point, this is where the book and the movie differ. The movie, playing it safe in a way, cast the whole story as what? Dorothy's dream. But for Frank Baum, it's very clear that in his story, she goes to an alternative reality, another realm. He, being a student of theosophy, as Charles Fillmore was, believed in a realm of ideals or divine ideas, a so-called astral or star realm, in which there was a pattern of being for everything on our earth. Dorothy goes to that place in the book. It's real. It exists. She constantly tells that in the movie. But the movie couches it all, well, you know, she just had a dream. It wasn't real. It was just her dream. But I wanted to emphasize so that you understand Frank Baum's theosophical or spiritual vision, that she went to a real place over the rainbow, beyond our earthly reality, but yet a real plane of existence. And so she begins her journey. She gets there and immediately wants to be where? Back home. Well, to help her along the way, she encounters several companions. She meets a scarecrow, and he introduces himself as one with what? No brains. He's just stuffed with straw. And his greatest longing is to have a brain. She meets the next companion, the next helper on her path, a Tin Woodsman. Now, in the movie, he's just fabricated. In the story, he was a real human being who, because a witch was after him and cast a spell on him, did not pay attention and with his axe lopped off an arm. He had the tinsman replace it with a replacement prosthesis, a tin arm. Well, this happened over and over until his entire human body had been replaced with tin components. The one problem is the tinsmith didn't remember to put in a heart. So his great longing was to find a heart. The third character, the cowardly lion. Yes, you're up. Oh, yeah, up there. The cowardly lion. Here is supposed to be a model of courage, but in reality, he thought he had no courage. He couldn't meet the demands of life. So these three characters, longing for wisdom, love, will or courage, Dorothy invites, join me on my quest to the great Wizard of Oz, and we will ask for what we need, for what we desire, our greatest hope. Because with his great power and goodness, he will surely grant our wishes. And so their adventure upon the yellow brick road begins. They meet many obstacles along the way. Something is trying to hinder them from seeing their dreams fulfilled. I don't know about you, but I have felt hindered in my lifetime many times from reaching my goals, from reaching my dreams. Haven't reached them all yet. But these companions become more and more convinced out of their concern, their love for Dorothy, that they want to see her get back to Kansas. So much so that along the way, in times of trial, they become very determined. We'll help Dorothy get to the wizard, even if we don't get their own desires. They have now turned their attention and focus upon the other, in this case, Dorothy. But one of the intriguing parts of the story, so closely related to our teaching in unity of the divine potential within us, is that we find it or discover it when we, come on, Jackie, express it. When we express it. So in this mystery, you know the story. They eventually, after many challenges, and even more in the book than in the movie, get to the Wizard of Oz. They perform the task of which we'll speak of in coming weeks, of gaining the broomstick as in destroying the Wicked Witch of the West. And by completing that task, the wizard has promised them their gifts. Unfortunately, they discover that the wizard is a humbug, an old word for someone that just puts on show, just a lot of flash and smoke and mirrors. And now they're really dejected until this wizard explains to them that through their very quest, through their very working together, they have already turned what they had within into that reality that they longed for. He does a few flashy things. He stuffs the scarecrow's head with bran and pins and needles. And the little pins and needles stick out of his head. And the lion says, that's to show that he's sharp. He sews a little satin heart into the tin torso of the Tin Man. He gives in the book a bowl of mysterious liquid to the lion. And the lion says, what is this? And the wizard said, well, I can't call it courage, but once it's inside you, it is courage. So I recommend you drink it quickly. So the lion drinks it up. So now they have the affirmation, the assurance, the confidence that they have these attributes, which in the truth of the story they had from the very beginning. Just as Dorothy was discover, she had the power to go home from the very beginning of the story. But she, as Glenda said, had to discover it for herself. Now this week, as I was thinking about this lesson, I was reflecting on my own life. Whenever we reflect upon a story, a myth, a legend, even from the Bible, it's most meaningful if we can relate it to our own life. Now in the story, Dorothy's companions realized that she invited them on a journey, and they found their dream. And Dorothy, disappointed that she's not yet found her way home to Kansas, her companions remind her what a difference she made in their life. By assisting her on her quest and path, their dreams were realized. Well, I was thinking about my best buddy back in New York, where I used to live, and we went on several great adventures, and we were recently reminiscing on those adventures. And he would say in a similar way to Dorothy and her companions, "Oh, thank you so much, James, for inviting me on this trip." Many trips, many adventures. And I, of course, would say, "But if you hadn't gone with me, I would have never had the adventures." In a very practical way, he helped me get my mother in her wheelchair off through an adventure in Switzerland and Italy, where she very nearly encountered the Pope in Rome. Quite a tremendous adventure, and it would never have been possible if I had not had a companion in that journey. Well, that made me think a little more, and that's about our spiritual family here. So often through my 30 years in working in unity, one way or another, I, of course, have had countless conversations. You know me, countless conversations with people. And so many have come to unity because they had a desire. Like one of our friends, they were seeking, they needed a healing. They needed a greater sense of God's presence as good, as meeting the daily needs of their life. Perhaps they wanted a sense of peace after a great loss or challenge in their life, a seeking for a wholeness, a balance. And so they happened to find their way into a unity community. Well, that's well and good. Myrtle Fillmore, the mother of unity, she was seeking too. But she soon realized that what she was discovering, what she called her discovery, in a way her finding the Emerald City, that discovery was something for every human being, and that we would help one another. Her idea of helping her companions became a whole movement that we now call our unity movement. But here, in our church, you may think that you've come for a heart, or a brain, or courage and confidence. But I ask you now to realize you have come to walk a path with others. You know, when you're in one of our classes, you'll often hear, "Well, Connie, ask your question," because there are other people here in the room that probably have that same question in their mind. Speak it out. We've all come seeking in one way or another, and we're all here to help one another along the way. That's what it means when you hear people here and in other churches speak of a spiritual family. A gathering of individuals, each with their own dream, but by their very coming together, they're helping each one to realize their dreams, to realize their truth. And in those challenging times of life, whether you call silent unity or go there by internet, whether you turn to our prayer ministry right here in our own church, the point is that you belong to a community where there are individuals like these three that want to support the Dorothy in your heart that may be lost or frightened or not know how to get home. There are people here to help. Often their help is silent in prayer. Other times it's in outer expression. And sometimes, just in our story, we'll talk in a couple of weeks about obstacles along the way. Sometimes there are individuals that are a hindrance or obstacle, at least we believe they are. But rightly seen, even those personalities are awakening us to a greater confidence, a skill, a new insight. A boss that was difficult helps you learn that you can stand up for yourself and speak what you think is true and right. Well, I would like to invite us now to turn within to a meditation a little differently than perhaps I sometimes present them. But I want us to go into the silence and look at our biography, that is our life story, symbolically, the story of our yellow brick road. So I invite you to turn your attention within. Close your eyes if you choose. But it's really to turn our attention from this outer worship service, the activities of this day, and to turn inward to that other realm. For Dorothy, it was a land of Oz. And I invite you to call forth a companion from your life, perhaps a family member, very close, or perhaps a teacher along the way, a co-worker, to just call forth the image of someone who has walked a part of the path with you, maybe for many years or maybe for just a short time, but it was a significant time. Realize how this individual has taught you to call forth the powers of your mind, to develop your insight, intuition, to see beyond appearances to that which is true, real, and powerful about you and your well-deserved place in this world. Perhaps this individual or another has taught you about compassion, love, forgiveness, letting go. Perhaps this individual or another has encouraged you, helped you to keep your focus upon your most cherished dream, the greatest longing of your heart. And for a moment in the silence, I invite you to image an action or hear a word that expresses your thanks to this individual, this companion on your journey. And now I invite you to realize that your power is greater. Your potential to see the true, the real, the good in this world is enhanced, emboldened through practice. And one practice is to behold the obstacles in our way. The hindering force. In the old Aramaic language, it was called Satana, the obstacle in our path. Perhaps there is an individual in your life story that you can call to mind and now allow yourself to focus upon the strength, the boldness, the creativity, the integrity that you discovered in yourself through your encounter with this one who seemed to hinder you. And I invite you again to hold a place of thanksgiving in your heart, not perhaps for your interaction, not for hard or unpleasant exchanges with this individual, but a thanksgiving that their presence on your path helped you discover the greatness, the well of potential within your soul that allowed you to meet and overcome the obstacle, to rise above it, and to continue your journey with a greater sense of the spiritual skills within your mind and heart and will. And gently allow your attention to return to the outer edges of your being, to become aware of this sanctuary and this church family with whom you are seated.